This show is notable for having one thing, of having the Macy's Parade Studio make a float specifically for an episode of the show. Fetch with Ruff Ruffman. Yes, that's right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Macy's Parade in Pop Culture. Today, we are looking at the 4th episode of the 3rd season and 44th episode in general of the PBS Kids series Fetch with Ruff Ruffman, specifically on the PBS Kids Go block. And this episode is specifically Mr. Ruffman Goes to Washington, which aired on October 2nd, 2008. Now, I was really looking forward to talk about this episode because I actually did watch Fetch with Ruff Ruffman when I was a kid, specifically the first 3 seasons. I have a lot of nostalgia for the first season because I had, me and my eldest sister usually had recorded an episode, at least from that season, mainly on a VHS. Season 2, not really one of my favorites, but there are some memorable moments. And Season 3 also had some notice, but I'm more of a nostalgia for the first season. However, ironically enough, I never watched the 4th and 5th season of the show. And there is a reason to that, because where I'm from, in central Pennsylvania, in Lycoming County, we actually, before, major, we had, a DirecTV, we had just a typical, cable, television, and we had 2 PBS Kids stations, WVIA and WPSU, and they both obviously had different scheduling programs, of course, but Fetch with Ruff Ruffman, I think the new episodes usually aired on each of the blocks specifically, but I think in different times, and I think PSU is the one that gets the newer episodes first. I don't remember the scheduling on it. But once we got DirecTV, we only had WVIA, and WVIA never aired the 4th or 5th season of Fetch, and that was probably most likely on WPSU, which we didn't had on DirecTV. So I never got the opportunity to watch those seasons, and not fully entirely, I think, still to this day, those 2 seasons in general. Maybe, I think the first episodes of each of those respective 2 seasons. I think mainly the 5th one. But that was just basically it. So I never had the nostalgicness of the entire show in general. And obviously the show did not last long. It only ended 5 seasons because there were not a lot of sponsors that wanted to fund the show. So in this episode, Ruff Ruffman, at the very beginning, the opening segment, found out that there is specific dog laws that dogs are not allowed to do that was dated back to the 1700s. One of them hosting a competition show, which could almost potentially end the entire show in general. This is not the first time Ruff had a situation that almost felt like the show was going to be canceled. That almost happened, a similar issue to the first episode of Season 2. So Ruff decided to run for office, in which I forget how long the title is, because it was some sort of, I forget how it was. So Ruff decided to have 2 big supports for him so people can vote for him for the upcoming election, which is kind of interesting since this was also the same year as the 2008 presidential election. Which were specifically a dog at the U.S. Capitol, which is owned by one of the senators of the U.S. government, especially the senator of Massachusetts, and a parade in the local area. So Ruff had sent 4 of his 6 fetchers to do 2 challenges. The first challenge, one of them, which was Sam, who was at the time the leader of the moment of the show around this 4th episode, to go to Washington D.C, while Noel, DJ, and Sammy went to Macy's Parade Studio, in Hoboken, New Jersey. And I know that's a little bit kind of questioning, but I'll probably explain more about that, more of a behind-the-scenes thing, even though I don't know much about it. But I know that's a bit off-canon, but I'll explain that a little bit when we get to about that. And Jay, who would later on become the winner of Season 3, and Harsha, stayed behind for the halftime quiz show. So let's talk about the main aspect of the episode in general a bit, and that is regarding Sam's visit to the U.S. Capitol, meeting none other than Senator Ted Kennedy at the time. Yes, the Ted Kennedy, the brother of President John and Senator Robert F. Kennedy. Um, that's just amazing that they managed to get somebody who knew one of the presidents of who is actually related to one of the presidents of the United States and one of the senators. And as many of you know, in real life, both John and Robert were both assassinated in the 1960s, and Ted is one of the surviving of the three brothers, if you would say. So it is amazing that Senator Ted Kennedy is without doubt the biggest guest star Fetch with Ruff Ruffman has ever received. I know they had like the host of Design Squad. It's kind of like a mini crossover with Fetch and Design Squad, and Andrew Stanton, the director of Finding Nemo, coming back to voice his character Crush that appeared in a season, I believe also in that same season as well, season 3, I believe, unless it was season 2. And so the big mission was for Senator Kennedy that gave to Sam was to ask kids, adults, some of them being teachers, and at the time, the Secretary of the U.S. Department of Education on should kids have longer school days or not. Now, this question obviously would probably be asked more, I would say, in today's standards. Well, because when you look at when we're in the 2000s to the 2020s, it's a little bit different because you got to keep in mind nowadays kids are now focused a lot more on technology, and education is not really something I don't know much about. I'm not somebody who knows, but it's just that more health issues have been coming in with kids in recent years, and there could be some scenario that technology, especially like phones and tablets and stuff like that, and social media has kind of been a major distraction in some kids' educations nowadays, which could also cause some problems in mental health. I'm just saying that. That's just something that I think many news articles would mainly say, but if this question was asked now, I think a majority of the kids would say no. If they, like, okay, most of them would be teenagers and stuff like that, but if it's like primary or intermediate, I would definitely think they would say yes. And it's ironic that they did manage to get the Secretary of the Department of Education, and it's very interesting. The U.S. Department of Education is a frequent sponsor in some many major PBS Kids shows. But ironically enough, not Fetch with Ruff Ruffman, because I know there have been some sponsors in the show that have, like the National Science Foundation. I think they have been a sponsor, I think, throughout the entirety of the show. The Arthur Finding Davis Foundation of the first season, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting for the 4th and 5th, Arby's for the first 2, Green Dog for the first 3, which we'll talk a little bit about the Macy's Parade a bit, and Chuck E. Cheese's, I believe, for the 4th and 5th. I don't remember if was there any other sponsors other than those ones. So, yeah, it's a very interesting sponsors history. But the U.S. Department of Education, or the Ready to Learn, or the No Child Left Behind grant during George W. Bush's presidency, were not sponsors of Fetch. So having somebody that is from a frequent sponsor of PBS Kids shows that is not a funding sponsor for Fetch is just interesting, to say the least. And obviously the result is like 70%, I believe, stated that they want more longer school days than shorter ones. And then at the end, after when Sam visits with Ted Kennedy again, and by the way, the dog that Ruff I mentioned was a Splash, which is the dog of Senator Kennedy, who only just appeared at the beginning, but we never seen him interacting with Sam at all. And at the end, when Sam ends his time with Senator Kennedy, like around 4 o'clock, Senator Kennedy gave Sam, I think, a book that I forget what it was called, but I think it's a real-life book that he wrote with his dog, about him and his dog Splash, while Sam gave Senator Kennedy a photo of him and the Ruff Ruffman walkabout that Ruff does not like to talk about, because a lot of the times he really does not like to talk about his walkabout, or mascot costume character to be precise, that is also in the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. I love how Ruff kind of criticized his own costume mascot. It's just like, because since he is an animated dog, of course. Now, I just want to get this one out of the way first about the halftime quiz show scenario, is that this is usually occurs when any contestants are left behind in the studio. If all the kids are out of the challenges, it doesn't happen. And usually, the halftime quiz show is usually the remaining fetchers try to answer 10 questions as possible, all in, I think, like 50 or 60 seconds. I forget how long I think it's 90 seconds, I believe, unless if I'm mistaken. But mostly, sometimes, there's not usually an episode that everyone's perfect, of course, because there's always wrong or right answers. In this one, Jay and Harsha almost got 9 out of the 10 ones. They just did not get to the 10th one in time. So we don't even know what the 10th question would have been. I would really love to see like scripts of like what would have been the 10 questions based on the episode specifically. Now let's talk about our main subject when it comes to this show specifically, and that is with Noelle, DJ, and Sammy going to Macy's Parade Studio, which was then in Hoboken, New Jersey. Now it's been, of course, currently located in Moonachie, to make a mini design Ruff Ruffman float for a mini parade. Now, Ruff himself would have gone to it, but because since his owner decided to make an invisible fence to remain him out of his doghouse, his owner just doesn't even understand how popular he is, but it's just that she's just treating him as a typical dog, almost like a troublesome one to be precise. So he had asked John Piper, who was the head designer of the parade from 2001 all the way up to 2019, to bring 3 of his fetchers to help him make a mini Ruff Ruffman float. Now, obviously, the show has a little connection to the Macy's Parade because, as I stated a little bit earlier, one of the sponsors for Fetch with Ruff Ruffman was Green Dog, which sponsored Fetch for the first 3 seasons. Green Dog did have a little appearance in the Macy's Parade throughout the 2000s with the original Green Dog Falloon, first standalone in 2000, and then a full float with a Falloon from 2001 through 2005, and no, 2004, I mean. And then from 2006 through 2008, they did the Starship Discovery, which did feature the cast of Fetch with Ruff Ruffman with the Ruff Ruffman Walkabout. Obviously, the first season in 2006, the second season in 2007, and the third in 2008. So Noelle, Sammy, and DJ got the experience to be on the actual Fetch float that their other Fetchers did. Shame the 4th and 5th one didn't, but then again, Green Dog was not a sponsor to the show for the last 2 seasons. And instead of using that float, of course, were making a little mini float with Ruff Ruffman, standing with a lot of flowers and a fire hydrant, and of course, obviously trying to campaign to vote for Ruff. It's, I think, one of the only few floats that Macy's Parade Studio made that was not a part of the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade. It would have been interesting if they would have continued having that little float for at least the last 2 years of the show, but it is ironic that they actually still made it. Now, which kind of makes sense because I think Green Dog has that connection with being a sponsor of the show to get to make that float. Well, for the fetchers to be at the parade studio. And it's ironic that Noelle, DJ, and Sammy were there the year before they were in the parade because if you have seen the famous Defunct TV episode on Fetch with Ruff Ruffman from the Defunctland YouTube channel, they filmed their seasons a year prior to them airing. So the first one was filmed during 2005, second in 2006, 7, 8, 9, you name it. So they just filmed it a year prior before it is aired on television. And it's usually the kids around, mainly the Boston area, that usually have got part of the show, with the most notable one being Taylor from the final season of Zoom appearing as a contestant on the first season. The reason I say it makes sense now with that in context of behind the scenes that it was season 3 was being filmed in 2007, because you can see in when they were building the Fetch with Ruff Ruffman float, you can see the Care Bears float kind of in production, kind of being built at the moment. It's not fully painted. You see lots of styrofoam. You see the bridge. I think you even see the snowman of the float. I even see, you even see when they're discussing about the sketch drawing of the Fetch float, you see all the paint figure, the paint model for the balloons, which I wish they would be figurines as always. And you see like all the balloons they have already up, like Izzy. I saw Ronald McDonald, Cassie, JoJo, Pikachu with the Pokeball, Little Bill. Um, I believe Dexter. No, I think I saw Garfield. Yes. Um, and then you can even see a little of the miniature sculptures, paint models of Hello Kitty and RT the Pirate that are lower. They're not up in the ceiling. They're kind of just on like a little table. And that kind of just proves to us that the 2007 parade, they were in production of that parade when they were filming this season 3 episode. So that is the big evidence that it is now understandable why they usually of the production's history and how they film it the year prior to the show. I keep repeating that, but so yeah, the episode was filmed in 2007. Now I will state this. Now, obviously, the big scenario is that the parade is actually the day of when they're making it, because Ruff thought it was last week, but Blossom, which of course has been Ruff's assistant in the second season, and I think more of her I forget, she got a promotion in the beginning of the third as like a supervisor to Ruff, I believe, from an assistant to the supervisor to him. So I think almost like now Ruff's boss or something like that, at least for the show specifically. And Chet became the mouse, became the new assistant to Ruff from the third to the final season. And Blossom just informed Ruff on the calendar that the parade was actually the day they were making the float it specifically. Now, I can guarantee you, I can tell you, in production, I don't think they did not make that float in one day. I guaranteed it probably took like, I don't know how long it took them to specifically to make that float and also filming that episode. John Piper would be the one to answer that question easily and how long that episode actually took them to film, because obviously doing that episode around the time when they were doing the 2007 parade, making the new floats and balloons, was kind of chaotic just for that one moment. But yeah, but the Ruff statue itself was really unique, especially since I think they maybe still do it to this day, that they still make all the animals and characters in a three-dimensional way through foam, through like a big block of styrofoam through a hot wire, which is something they have been doing for quite a while. Like any animals or any characters in a Macy's float, they're all made out of foam, blocks of foam, of styrofoam, and they're just cut neatly through a hot wire. And obviously they have to like make sure they're cleaning everything, like zesting it, as Ruff calls, and like zesting a lemon, specifically zesting all the foam to make sure they got the right shape for the Ruff Ruffman sculpture they're doing. And then I think for the parade itself, I think it probably took place somewhere in the Boston area, because I don't know if it was in the New Jersey area. I believe I might be wrong, but I feel like because it obviously a float. I don't think that's how the float is. Like it's kind of hard, because obviously when every Macy's parade float, they're always folded up because they have to go through the Lincoln Tunnel the night before Thanksgiving, maybe in a different tunnel. I think it's still the Lincoln Tunnel every year, I believe. Because now they've been assembling the floats earlier than usual, around the same time they begin in the inflation of the balloons. So now everyone can see the setting up the floats, and I think that was a starting point at the beginning of this decade in particular. So creating a float also has a bit of a scientific experiment, and even John Piper, kind of ironically, also had a little theater experience a bit, because in the technical side, because as somebody who also had a little bit of a theater experience in the technical side a bit as well, especially for the high school comedy troupe that I was a part of, it's just unique that somebody else who later on became a head designer of the Macy Parade had a little world of theater experience in the technical side, so that was pretty clever. After, when all the challenges are over, Ruff gives points out. For the fetchers that are remain in the studio, they are already their points at the halftime quiz show, and those fetchers get the challenges, do the challenges. They get the number of points they have received. The maximum usually is 100 points, usually, for the sake of the trial challenge, because Ruff kind of explains the point system every episode, and everyone has the same number of make sure to have almost a close amount of the same number of points by the grand finale to make things even, instead of just getting the favoritism towards one specific contestant to make everyone fair. I mean, the person who was in last place, I believe his name is Mark, was in last in the season 5 finale and ended up winning that season. That's just amazing, like how evenly the competition is for all fetchers. So, Jay and Harsher had received their points from the halftime quiz show. Noel, DJ, and Sam got each of their individual points, the same number of points for the challenge they done, and Sam got his. And then there's usually a bonus point that usually gives, like either 10 or 5. And the bonus point was given to Sam because Senator Kennedy asked Sam, after how well he did on his challenge, to maybe even work with Senator Kennedy. Now, also just want to mention that Senator Kennedy obviously would pass away a year after this episode aired, since he did pass away in 2009. So Sam got the 5 bonus points, and he won the challenge by 85 points. And usually, the fetcher has an optional prize. Now, in the first season, the fetcher who won the challenge has the option to give to another fetcher the prize if something bad would happen. A great example is in season 1, where Anna was the daily winner for the episode, and she decided not to get the prize and had her fellow challenger of that fellow contestant that was also part of the challenge with her in that same episode, Julia, the prize instead. And the prize was Julia had to wear a bee costume for 24 hours, and that just like was the best. That's almost like way to not do. That was like so funny that Julia had to get that prize from Anna. And then in the second season onwards, they now have an A and a B option for the challenger, or the fetcher, I would say specifically. Sam chose B, and he got a root beer float. Because Ruff said he would have had done a float, but there was no way it would have fit in the mailbox. But a root beer float, it makes a lot of sense, I guess. So that's how it was. And then at the end, Ruff found out he didn't get elected, even though he was the only candidate. But probably no one didn't vote for him, even though kids would have. But obviously you had to be 18 to vote. But the good news is Ruff did had a best good news that he was allowed to do the stuff he wanted, but there are some moments that like a cat can prevent him to doing stuff, and that's what Blossom did by sending his violin, I think some sort of coat rag he wore and licorice, to like some sort of NASA astronaut, I believe. So that kind of sucked for Ruff. So that is kind of all it is. I know it is, it makes a lot more sense when you watch the entire season of who goes on to win the season. As I said, Jay would end up becoming the winner of season 3. Obviously, these season 3 fetchers got the experience the year of the Macy's Parade when the season aired that year in 2008, which was, of course, the final year of that Green Dog Starship Discovery float. And that kind of wraps up the PBS Kids route, but there is one more television series episode we have to go to, and that is on Nickelodeon, and kind of like how the Fetch episode aired in 2008, we have to go a year later in 2009 with a Nickelodeon star getting on the Build-A-Bear Workshop float.